really exciting to see you here today and to explore this question about second language learning, even bilingualism in the Montessori classroom. On behalf of Montessori Europe, we're really thrilled to have the Prepared Montessorian Institute as a sponsor for Montessori Europe. Let me introduce the president of Montessori Europe, Barbara Isaacs. Barbara, would you like to say a welcome?
Thank you so much, Judith, for the introduction. And I'm delighted to welcome Mariana for her presentation. For all of us in Europe, second language teaching is of paramount importance because we all want to learn English, the language of the internet. And at the same time, we need to respect the culture of the children and the culture that is represented by their language. So it is really a vital topic to explore tonight. And I hand over to Mariana and to her presentation. And thank you very much, Judith, for making sure that we are all connected.
You're welcome. Mariana is uniquely qualified to speak to us about this topic because she herself is a bilingual learner and grew up in dual language. And so her experience in a Montessori classroom is particularly adept with bilingualism, and she is the Dean of Training for the Prepared Montessori Institute. Mariana, we welcome you.
Hi, thank you, Judy. Thank you, Barbara. I'm very happy to have this time with you. So let's begin. Let me, and if you hear a little thing, is people still coming into our meeting, so that's great. I am going to share my screen now. So I saw that some of you already started posting on the chat. We're going to be using the chat a little bit to communicate and to interact. I love interaction. So if you want to interact, that's great. You can use the chat. And also one of the things that I would love to know is where are you located? So there's in there on the chat, you can put your name and your location. I'm currently, let me do my quick introduction. Located in Austin, Texas in the United States. I have lived in several places in the United States, but I'm originally from Mexico. And I lived most of my life in Cancun. So probably a lot of you have heard Cancun. So yes, I was there when Cancun was like this tropical paradise, still is, but it was a place that we just had a lot of beaches and very nice. So my experience, as Judith was mentioning, I grew up at home speaking Spanish and at school having a full immersion program in English, and that helped me to build up into this. I'm very interested in that. And then took my training in English. My experience also in bilingual education, I worked at a dual language public Montessori school in Denver, Colorado, one of the first Montessori schools to try Montessori and dual language and public. This was 20 years ago. The school turned 20 years last year. And we developed the program. We wanted to see what was working and how we could address the needs of the children, but not just the language. Also the cultural aspects that come with language. And we're going to be discussing that, as Barbara was saying, that's a very important aspect about bilingualism. I also have done some training for China. I support our trainers in our training center in Beijing and Shanghai. So I'm familiar with how to do bilingualism in Mandarin. So I will be discussing, my examples will be in Spanish and Mandarin, although I don't speak Mandarin, I know a couple words. I am very familiar with the process. So I'm going to be focusing my examples on that. So let's begin. And we have a tradition in our training center every time that we do our courses, and it's that we sing a cappella. So I want to invite you, if you want to sing with me, that will be great. This is a very short song, but I want to model you something that is called TPR. Probably you're familiar with this term. I'm going to be discussing more about it. But as I sing the song, I'm going to model this. It's something that I acquired a lot when I was working with children in second language environments. So let me begin. I am going to do it one time, as Montessorians do. We'll model it to you, and then I'm going to stop sharing my screen and we will do it together. You ready? Give me thumbs up. Yeah. Okay. Let's begin. And this song is When You Wake Up. So it goes like this. 1, 2, here we go. When you wake up in the morning, you wanna wash your face. Wash your face. When you wake up in the morning, wash your face and get ready for a brand new day. Okay, so let me stop sharing my screen and let's do it together. You ready? 1, 2, here we go. When you wake up in the morning, you wanna wash your face. Wash your face. When you wake up in the morning, wash your face and get ready for a brand new day. Miranda, what else do you do in the morning? Is there something else that you do in the morning when you wake up? When you wake up?
I do some exercise.
Okay, great. So you can do that. When you wake up in the morning, you want to exercise. Exercise. When you wake up in the morning, exercise and get ready for a brand new day. Okay, so as you were able to see, I use a lot of movements. Children start in a bilingual setting and they're very young, they're very eager to learn language, but they don't understand yet the second language. So we want to use a lot of movements to help the children understand what we're saying. And we use that initially, and then we transition little by little to stop using all of those movements, like stand up, sit down, and we want to make sure that the child can see those movements so that way they can absorb them. One of the reasons also we love to do the singing when we start our sessions is that it's a way for us to connect. When we think about, everybody's thinking about the song, that we're connecting and we're present in the moment. So thank you for being present in the moment. Let me begin now, and I'm going to share my goals for today. So today, the goals that I have, give me a second, start sharing my screen. I have 3 goals. We are going to be discussing why the Montessori environment is an ideal setting for second language. And we're gonna talk about what are some of those characteristics that support second language learning. Then we're gonna talk about challenges and techniques, because if you have worked in a bilingual setting, you know that there are challenges. And sometimes it's hard, it's a challenge to go through them. But I'm gonna share with you some of the techniques that I have learned, that I have heard from other colleagues, and we have tested in many of our programs. And then at the end, I am going to go through a 4-step cycle on how to start your second language learning. This effective cycle for making sure that you have an effective program. By the way, a quick announcement. At the end of the session, I am going to share with you the outline of this presentation. So you're going to have the main information there. Maria Angelica, who's here, she put together that for us. So you're going to have an outline that will have the main information discussed here. So you're welcome to take notes, but also you're welcome to enjoy, because you're going to get the information when we finish. Okay, so let's begin with the first one. The Montessori environment as an ideal setting for second language. Before we begin with this, I want to know a little bit more about you. So if you can go on the chat and write yes or no. Do you have experience in Montessori? I want to know how much should I talk about this, or how many Montessorians we have in the room. So you can go ahead and do that. Yes, I see a lot of yeses. So we're going to be agreeing in many things. A lot of what I'm going to be discussing is that I'm going to be talking mostly about the age group of 3 to 6. There are several things that also apply to infants and toddlers. They're a little bit different. And then mention a couple examples that can work for elementary. So yes, we have a lot of Montessorians here in the room, so that's exciting. So I think that I don't need to advocate for Montessori. It works. It's ideal for many things, not just for second language. But let's see how we can describe this. So I want to begin with a quote, and it's not a Montessori quote. And I'm going to read it to you. And what I want to do is for you to take 1 minute to analyze this quote and think about, what does this mean to you? So it says, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. Let's take a moment to think about it. And if you want to unmute your microphone, or if you want to use the chat to tell me, what do you think this quote is talking about? Okay, I love that there's some things on the chat coming. So I see Sarah, motivation to learn. Yes, energy comes from within. Love that. Anyone else that wants to share? Okay, so I see another one. The difference between active learning rather than passive learning. Okay, so yeah, the mind is not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be kindled. And I really love to share this quote when we think about second language. I myself were in a programs where second language was given, and I have been in a lot of schools where I observe, and even Montessori schools when there's someone coming into the room and wanted to teach the children a second language. And a lot of the times it's about memorization. We are Montessorians, we get that children need to have concrete experiences, but still sometimes when we're teaching a second language, the experience becomes very traditional. A teacher comes, sings a song with the children, and it is just like memorization, children repeating. Probably they don't understand what they're saying, and they are not even saying the words correctly. And a lot is focused on that. So I really want us to think about this quote when we're thinking about teaching a second language in the environment. I want to give you an example. This is something that I'm very familiar with. So I went to traditional school. I didn't go to Montessori. And when I was in traditional school, we had to memorize a lot of things, and I had to memorize a lot of things in English, and sometimes I didn't understand those things. So I want to give you an example. This is a contrast exercise. You're probably are familiar with prepositions, right? In Montessori, I see a lot of guides from Children's House. So in Montessori, prepositions are given orally, and we also have function of the words exercises, right, to do prepositions. In a more traditional approach, usually what happens is that children memorize them, and they get very excited. Let's take a look at this video. It's from YouTube. So
this is our list of prepositions. Aboard, about, about, across, after, against, along, among, around,
and keeps going and going. And there's nothing wrong with this. It's children reciting something. They don't have an idea. What is this? They're memorizing words. Probably if you ask them what is below, above, like they don't understand really what that word means. They can memorize it, but it is not a clear understanding. Let's take a look at the contrast, what we do in the Montessori environment.
Now, Michelle, I'm going to go and stand under a lamp. Can you have a turn to go stand under the lamp?
yes.
Can you see with this example, how can it be applied in a second language learning? Can you see the possibilities of this? A lot of the times we're thinking about like the songs that we think, like getting a lot of vocabulary, probably enrichment of vocabulary with cards, but sometimes we don't think about all of these things that are necessary for the child to learn when he wants to speak a second language. Preposition, verbs, actions, like all of those things that the child needs. And we have these beautiful presentations that we're acting them out. We're doing this where the children are acting the presentation. So any thoughts about these examples? Okay, I will continue. Give me a second. My PowerPoint freezed a little bit. It closed, so it's opening again. And give me a second to share it with you slowly. It's taking a little bit of time to load again. But in the meanwhile, I want to talk about this part. Like, so what we're thinking when we're doing a second language is that we're thinking that we're doing a real experience. It is not just singing, it's an experience that the child goes through. And that's part of what we're looking when we're thinking about this. So that's one of the characteristics of Montessori, that it is through meaningful, real experiences, almost as natural. And I love that, because now that I'm going to be able to share my screen when I finish opening my PowerPoint, you're going to see this, where we're trying to find out, what we're trying to do introducing the second language in Montessori is that we want to have this natural experiences for the child, similar as what we did when we learned the first language. This is a very young child. This young child started learning their first language a couple years ago. Perhaps if they join an A2I program, an infant community program, they join at age 2, 18 months. So they have been in the world for a short time. They still have that absorbent mind. So we want them to have this spontaneous, natural experiences to absorb the environment, because children learn like that, not like adults. For adults, we need to read more, we need more explanations about, but children can learn like this. So let's take a look at more characteristics that we have in Montessori that are going to help us give a second language. We are all familiar with isolation of quality. Why is it essential for second language learning? We take a look at the color tablets. What do we see there? Just colors, right? There's nothing else distracting us from what we want to learn. And now let's take a look at this contrast exercise. Usually in more traditional approaches, when we want to show the colors, there's flashcards, there's images. And if I say, for example, I could say rojo or cangrejo, and you're like, well, for me it's the same. It's a new word. And if I'm showing you this where there's a crab and there's strawberry and there's cherries, you may not know what rojo means, because there's many objects in there that are distracting you, right? And in Montessori, because we're isolating the quality, the child can see what is rojo. I can just say rojo, I don't need to translate, and you know what I mean, even if you don't speak Spanish. Also, like, as you know, well, we have the concrete materials. The children can have many experiences to manipulate those materials before they get the experience of language. So it's very important for the child to have all these experiences of absorbing and seeing it. So it's concrete. It's something that I can touch, that I can feel, that I see. We see at this exploration that comes first, a lot of exploration, and then we give language. So let's think about how we do it in the second language environment. One of the things that we motivate adults to do is that they're going to have this sensorial experience with the material. And then when we introduce language, we do it in the same way that we would do it for the first language. We also are going to be touching the material, and we are going to say cylinder or cilindro or the word in different languages. And then we're giving the child this idea so he can think about that in the second language. Another characteristic that also supports the development of second language is that the materials connect to the world. Remember that we have in our sensorial albums all of those memory games that we go, and the child goes and, okay, I am going to find something that matches this. And the child has learned the colors, so perhaps he's new and now knows purple and green and orange, and now he's going to go and, I'm going to find something in the environment that is purple. So we are sending this connection with the materials into the environment. So later the child that gets out of the Montessori classroom and goes into the world has those connections and can say like, oh, flores moradas, like we'll remember those words of, in English, purple and flowers, because he had those experiences, not just with the material, but with things that are in his surroundings. And later on, this is a child that we can start literacy in the second language. These are children that are in an immersion program. It's an example. You can see that they pull out the color tablets. A lot of the times when they're working in an immersion classroom, children like to get something concrete to write about because their vocabulary is not as extensive as in their first language. So these are children that spontaneously took the color tablets, put them there, and start writing the names of this material. No? So pink, gray, as you see, phonetic writing. We also have opportunities to make this very concrete. This is an exercise also where we can model, and the teacher has those bring me games with the mobile alphabet to do this. So we're making these connections where the child is learning first. For the second language, we need to make sure that the child learns the basic things, the parts of their body, everything that is in the environment. We need to give that, very similar to how we do it in the first language, but we're more intentional in the second language. We're going to do boca, nariz. And we make sure that we're pronouncing and enunciating correctly so that the child can have that experience. Another aspect that promotes another characteristic of Montessori that helps the development of second language is we have the luxury of working one-on-one. We have the luxury of working with one child and making sure that we're meeting the needs. Because as you're developing a second language, some children may struggle with this, and we need to define this. There are children that the priority now it's the first language, and they're really eager to learn that. And then we can wait until that process is formed to start the process of the second language. I'm going to explain more about that. And then also small group lessons where we can act out many things, like if we're going to be there and it's just not spoken language, it's spoken language using TPR, using movement, using images. Okay, we're getting to the last part of this first session, and I want to point out that one of the things that we need to also distinguish is that there's different ways of doing second language. The three main ones that I'm very familiar with, it's language immersion, and I have in there 100% because it means total immersion. Is when a young child starts in a Montessori classroom, and we are going to be having all of the instruction, all of the presentations, both adults in the classroom, the guide and the paraprofessional or assistant will be doing all the lessons in the second language. So that's language immersion. That's one kind of program that is recommended for second language. Another one is bilingual. This is the most common one, where it's approximately 50-50. And that one means that one adult speaks the native language of the children and one adult speaks the second language. And presentations are given by the adult that speaks. Let's say that we have Spanish and English. Presentations are given in English, presentations are given in Spanish, and then we try to have the same amount of time. It's not easy to have a program like that. We need to work a lot on lesson planning. So the guides need to have the knowledge of that. We need to have, for several materials in language, 2 sets, one set in Spanish and one set in English, or one set in French and one set in English. And that's very important. And then the third model is dual language. This is a model that I really love, and I have worked in the 3 different settings. The third one is just amazing because you have the bilingual 50-50, or probably sometimes we need to do like 60, a little bit more on the target language, on the second or foreign language, because they don't hear it outside of the Montessori setting. But we are adding a component that is really crucial. And it is that there are some children in the classroom that speak that targeted language. So what happens in there? This is a child that is not just motivated to talk to the teacher, but my motivation comes from the social interactions with other children. So when I want to speak the second language, it's not just because I want to learn more vocabulary or access the materials, but I want to have a social interaction with my peers. So that's pretty motivating. I work in there and I saw the children like just having this explosion of the second language. Okay, let me stop here. Are there any questions about this before I move into the second goal that we have for today? Okay, so we can also write our questions, and at the end we can have a Q&A. Let me continue sharing. Okay, so let's move into the second goal that we have for today. So first, like we're on the same page. We understand that Montessori is a really ideal setting for second language learning because of all these characteristics that we have. Now let's move into challenges and techniques. Now let's talk about what are some of the things that we want to achieve and how we can achieve them. Let's begin first with this challenge. I want to help the children learn to think in the second language, and not only to repeat random words to translate. So let me stop here. And I know that Barbara was nodding when I was telling about like, it's not just about memorizing a song that I don't know what I'm saying and just repeating words, similar to the girls just repeating all those prepositions, right? We don't want that. Like that is a way for the child to like maybe acquire pronunciation, get some vocabulary, but that's not the main goal of bilingualism. What we really want is for the child to, as soon as they are speaking the second language, they're thinking in that language. And that's not easy, but it's very doable. And it's doable with young children, because as you know, children have the observant mind. So it's a precious age and their sensitive period for language, and not just their native language, sensitive period for all language. I always do this experiment every time that I'm like at an elevator or I'm in a place and I see a baby and the baby looks at me and I know, like I say hola, and in another language that the child doesn't know. And what is amazing, or if I start speaking to someone else, not even to the child, it is like the child looks like this. That's language, but it's not the language that I know. That's like different. Like you can really, like for me, that's my experiment of seeing that sensitive period for language, right? Because they're really like, okay, this adult speaking, but I don't get it. And I really am very interested, and it never fails. They always look at me when I'm speaking the second language. So this is something that we're looking. So how do we achieve this, right? Are we on the same page? We really want this. We want this part, no? We know that when the child is learning language, in this front part of the brain is forming. So at the beginning, they have like this kind of commuter that they can do like one language and migrate to the other very easily, not like us, where I'm like, if I want to learn, I've been wanting to learn Mandarin and a little bit of Italian, and I need to make an effort, right? Now it's not there, it's not developing. I really need to think and go through several different processes in my mind. But for the child, this process is simple. So we need to be very deliberative as we are doing this. We need to think how we are going to promote these experiences. And there's a lot of common mistakes that second language teachers do. The first one is that we are very tempted to translate. So a child comes, they don't speak the language, and we say, siéntate, siéntate. And the child is like, I don't know what you're saying. And they're like, oh, I mean, you need to sit down. As soon as we do that, we're not helping the child think in the second language. We need to use every technique that we have that I'm going to share with you to make sure that we don't translate. Children don't get, young children especially, they don't get desperate when they don't understand because they're being there lately. It's not like an adult that I'm speaking like a second language and you're like, you need to tell me what you're saying. The child, a young child, usually before the age of 5, they're okay with not understanding everything and they know they're going to get there. So that's my experience. I know that as they get older, they're looking into translation. So we want to avoid this where we are translating. Another thing that is very common is that sometimes parents encourage that. So a parent enrolls a child in a bilingual program and they come home and they say, oh, Antonella, so now you speak Spanish, right? Can you say dog in Spanish? And then the child is like in a position where like we're not teaching them to translate. They're not doing this switch. So that's another thing that happens a lot because the children are not thinking like that. Ideally, what we want to do is want to give the experience with concrete materials. So that's why it's great we have the Montessori materials to do this. So if I want to teach the child what pequeño or grande means, and I don't need to translate it for you, you know, pequeño and grande. And we have the pin tower to give that language, grande, and the child is feeling it. I don't need to translate to show the child pequeño, pequeño aquí, grande, and you're familiar with this 3-period lesson to give language with sensorial materials. So that's a technique that we can use. We want to avoid translating instead. Remember, we have a lot of our materials that are going to help us do that. And we're going to find in our materials ways to do that, but not always. There's something like also like emotions. Emotions are not easy to explain to children. So we want to make sure that we are giving the child that language too. Emotions, feelings. My recommendation is to have cards. It can be enrichment of vocabulary cards. So you have 2 sets where it's like sad, happy, joyful, and you're giving the child this because once the child starts expressing in the second language, we want them to have words to express how they feel, right? Similar as we do in English, but this is in their native language. The child, it's easy because they hear them all outside of the environment. These words, we need to be very careful and make sure that we give them to the children, because if not, we generate frustration when they want to say something or when we're saying something and they cannot express. So very conscious about those ones. Use the material, but if you don't have it, like let's create enrichment of vocabulary cards that are going to give the child that vocabulary. Another technique, this is also something very important. And also I have seen that it's very common. So we're talking, let's think of a bilingual program where we have one adult speaks English, one adult speaks Spanish, right? A lot of the times the adults think that it's okay to do the same lesson in Spanish, like let's say some paper letters you're doing, and then the same day you're giving in Spanish. So the child has the same content the same day. That's a big mistake, because what we're doing is that we're going back into this translation. And also what happens is that it's not interesting. The child's like, oh, I already did this. Like I did it with the other teacher. What we want to do is we want to give the child very interesting content. So our focus is on the content, not on the language, not on the second language. What we want to do is that we are going to focus on giving the child knowledge, and the extra or the cherry on top of the cake, it's the language. So let's think about this, a child that wants to learn about things, and here the teacher comes and says like, okay, you know what, in here I have, all this in the second language, and the child is feeling it. Oh, globo terráqueo, isla, and you're talking about this, and the child is interested, probably not understanding everything that we're saying, but he's eager to learn about the continents, eager to learn about animals, eager to learn about different aspects that they have. And with that, what we do is that we're giving the child something interesting and relevant. And the indirect thing is giving them language, second language. So you see, we're going to be doing this a lot, because I think that one of the things that I see a lot happening in bilingual classrooms is that the bilingual teacher, or the teacher that is going to be giving the second language, comes with a plan. Like a plan of giving, like, I'm going to do the songs, I am going to give them like something to color, like, and they're not using the necessary material. So ideally, we want to have an adult that is trained, that speaks that language, and is a native speaker, and that is presenting materials to the children in the same way that we present. There needs to be a lot of coordination. We are going to make sure that the adults are doing this lesson planning together. And again, avoiding that as soon as we present this, like if we're going to be doing mammals in English, well, maybe let's focus on land and water forms in Spanish. Very different subjects. We don't need to be doing this back and forth because the child is not going to be interested. I already had the lesson. It was in another language, but they already had them. Any thoughts or any questions as we move forward? We're good? Okay, go ahead, Barbara.
Could I just ask, of course, all this presentation in the second language would only begin once the child is well settled in, having used, hopefully, their home language. Would you not say?
Yes, so Barbara, that's also very interesting. So let's think about a bilingual program. The first thing is that the child needs to adapt, right? Adaptation happens differently for different children. We're going to be doing preliminary exercises and grace and courtesy, and we want to do a lot of things for the child to adapt. Mainly, like, we want to have that connection, like that building trust with a child comes easily in this first language, of course. Like that's how my mom speaks, and I can hear that and feel familiar with it, and I feel reassured. And I think in a bilingual program, I will encourage to have like that, but some grace and courtesy presentations in Spanish start giving the child that there's another adult that speaks another language and doing that. So I'm familiar with the concept of grace and courtesy, like let's show me how you walk in the environment, and then I can do it in Spanish. Probably not the first day, the same day, but do that. So start doing that so the child feels comfortable doing something, and since the beginning start seeing that, yes, you probably are not understanding everything, but because I'm moving, because I'm using concrete materials, you get some of it. So yeah, in an immersion program, that's the challenge, Barbara. An immersion program is when it's 100%. When we want the child to have a full, like let's say that this is a child that is moving to another country. It's kind of that experience that we want to replicate. But of course, there needs to be a transition process where the child comes with a parent. There needs to be more intentional work that we do to make the child comfortable in that setting, where we are going to have like a time that the parent comes with the child, a time that there's someone like that. What I try to do when we have that immersion program, I try to have one adult that doesn't break the code. What does break the code means is that stays in the targeted language, and the other adult that recognizes and says, I'm bilingual. I speak this language and I'm going to be speaking with you sometimes in English and sometimes in Spanish, but this needs to be very organized. Remember, the child needs order. And if we're going back and forth, that's not going to create order. And we're going to have children doing, like, for example, Spanglish, no, that they're missing Spanish and they're mixing English, and they're not proficient in either of the languages. And we need to be very careful with this. This is also, Barbara, what I recommend parents. So we see a lot of households now that are dual language or 3 languages at home. My recommendation to those parents is to have either, if they can, have one adult focusing one language, another adult in the other language, but it's rare. Like, usually they get to a point where they're speaking the other language. My recommendation is to find times of the day where you're going to be speaking that language, and you always do. So that child understands that, oh, breakfast is in Spanish, dinner is in English. So they have this idea, this concept. When I work in the dual language program, we had something, and it was a sign where we're like, it's Spanish time. And then the children got that and they understood that we were bilingual. So that's one of the things that we need to make sure that we're taking care, that the child trusts the adult. And as we build that trust, then we start introducing to that second language. And it varies depending on the type of program that you have, Barbara. That was a great question. Thank you. Okay, so I see something on the chat. Let me see how you manage when a child is new to bilingual school, let's say Spanish, English, but he does not speak either of them at all. Oh yeah, so how do we manage that? That there's a child coming into a bilingual school and they're gonna do Spanish, but then they also don't speak. So they have like a third language, right? Yeah. So first of all, we wanna make sure that the child feels comfortable. I worked, I was a head of school in a Montessori school in Florida, in Miami, and we got a lot of international families, and we had a similar case. It was a child that speak Russian, but then we were giving English and we were giving Spanish. So first of all, he had to feel comfortable, and he would struggle at the beginning. I remember he needed a lot of connections. This was the child that was like helping us feed the animals and watering the plants and taking care of our garden. We did a lot of things where the child felt comfortable, and they start getting it. And one of the things is that we told the parents, keep promoting the native language at home, keep doing that. Another thing that I'm going to be discussing, this is very important when we have the parents and the child, is that you need to define one language for literacy. That's another very important thing, that hold on to that, because I am going to get there. So let's, okay, so someone is asking a question. Yeah. I noticed that in Spanish vocabulary, the cards do not include the article. Thoughts on that? Yeah. Spanish, sometimes articles are challenging because they don't make sense. It can be feminine and masculine and have an A or an. So sometimes the cards in Spanish can include the article, but as Montessori's, we also try to do the isolation. So there you can see cards with the article or without the article. And I think both are fine. A lot of the time it's just that we want to start early, isolate as much as possible, but also start early associating the article, because it's not easy to learn the articles in Spanish. So that was a great question. Thank you, Elisa. Okay, so let's move into, yeah, so this is the card, lago, isla. We don't have el lago or la isla. No, islas, yes. So let me talk about another technique. So we're thinking about, the challenge was help children think in the second language. The other technique is that I described a little bit, one language at a time, or one adult, one language, right? So either we have a designated time for the language, which is not super ideal. I think it is the best thing to do is having one adult that speaks one language and the other one another language. That's the ideal setting. If it's not possible, having different times, but it is very hard in Montessori to have like times, because we don't have like, our schedule is, we do a lot of independent learning. So it's easier and more natural for the adult to be making individual connections and presentations or lessons with the children on the targeted language. Okay, let's move into the second challenge. The children struggle to understand the new language initially, especially guidelines and limits. So this is also very common. And as you know, children get things, and they see that this adult is telling me this, I don't truly understand. So it's hard for me to follow a direction of to understand what I'm doing. So what is a technique that we can use? As I was sharing you initially with the song, and I've been sharing throughout my presentation, is use TPR. So it's total physical response. There's some training on that, and I find it very easy, probably because I'm Latin and I move my hands a lot. But it's doing, saying something and then doing the motion. So one of the things that you need to be careful is that you don't do it at the same time. So we will say stand up, and then we do the motion. We tend to do it, stand up and do it at the same time. And remember that Montessorians, we don't do that. We isolate, it's either movement or language. So we want to do that a lot of TPR. So for example, remember we walk. That can be a way of reminding the children. And then we can say, Marian, can you show me how you walk? So I gave her, yeah, so that Marian can stand up and then do walking, right? But it's giving her a cue. It's giving her something that will trigger that. Also, another thing that we need to be careful, as soon as the child starts gaining more comprehension and understanding more and having more vocabulary, we need to lower down the amount of TPR that we're using. Because if not, we're making the child dependent. And remember, we don't want to do that. We want the child to be independent, not needing all the signs to understand what we're saying. So we can use this to support that and the child giving him a cue for the second language. But we get rid of that. At some point we say, show me how you walk. And we're not doing any of those cues or TPR. So that's one technique that I highly recommend. We saw it in here, like touching things, bringing the material, like also once the child is at a stage where they are reading, when we do like labels in the environment, and so we can have this and connecting. Another aspect, so guidelines can be a little bit challenging, right? We want to tell the children that we give a presentation and we say we go down the slide, and we repeat this, but we see a lot of children going up the slide, and we want to reinforce this limit, right? What can we do? One of the things that I have done and has worked really well, and I got this from a therapist, and I just thought like, whoa, this could be great for second language. So I have done printed cues. So printed cues are like images showing an action. So I already gave the presentation. I go with the children and I say, let's go, let me show you how we go down the slide. And I do it and I invite them to do it as we do presentations. But then if I want to give them a gentle reminder before going to the playground, I pull out my card and I say, children, remember, we go down the slide. And I'm giving a visual cue to remind the children of that. I think that probably I won't use this if the children in their native language, but in the second language, I want to be reinforcing this and doing this. What I have done also is like a little booklet of different transitions sometimes, because transitions can be challenging when they don't know, they get used to the transition, but sometimes it's important. Mostly when you're also having like a normalized environment, children are understanding a little bit more, but then you have a new child coming in, and then that child needs that. A lot of the children are like understanding your routines, understanding transitions, they get the language, but the new child doesn't. So it's good to have those visual cues. Another technique is that, remember in our albums, we have language, and the first part of language is spoken language and enrichment of vocabulary. And it's very abstract, right? It's very abstract. It's conversations, it's rhymes, it's singing, is the question game, clapping, all of this exercise that we do, they're very abstract. So my recommendation for teaching a second language is that bring spoken language to the next level. Like you need to plan for spoken language every day and deliberately give a lot of these lessons. Make sure that, for example, in here, I give you an example, make sure that you are bringing all of the objects that you have in the environment and you're giving that vocabulary to the child. So a lot of spoken language using the objects in the environment, using the materials, or using your enrichment of vocabulary cards. And even with interpretative. So where you're doing a lot of like under the lamp or walking and the child does it. So that way it's an experience rather than just isolated vocabulary. We want to make sure that we do that. And there's other two techniques that I'm going to discuss. This one is very related to what Barbara was saying initially, that language is not just speaking and understanding, it's also getting familiar with the culture. So it's very important for us to give that context. So if we are speaking a language, we want to not just give the language, we want to immerse a little bit the child into the culture of that language. How do we do that? We have different techniques to do that. And an example of this is like, well, this is my daughter, and we went to Chichen Itza, and I can explain, and it's in the Riviera Maya. And then we went to an island, and do you know what's an island? And I'm speaking the second language, and I can pull out the material and explain the child, this is an island, but I make it cultural where it's like, oh, and there's this island, Isla Mujeres, that's the island that I visited, and get the material, and then, but with a cultural context so that the child is absorbing that. And that will be a motivation for the child to do it. We not only are giving them like, oh, the vocabulary of the puzzle maps, but we are also giving some of that context. Okay, let's move into two more challenges that we have, and then we're going to move into our third part of the session. So the next challenge, it's very easy to fix, but it's also very common. And it is, the guides speak the same language, yet they call things differently. And I see some laughing. For example, I am from Mexico, and I call like a jacket, I call it chamarra, and I have a friend that she's from Colombia and she calls it chaqueta. Like, so it's the same thing, but we call it differently. So a lot of the times it is very important for us to get together, the adults that are working on that bilingual environment, and agree on how you're going to be calling things, but keep consistency. Right? We don't want it to, one adult calls it one way and the other adult, and then the child gets confused like what it is, because we're not giving the same language. And even if it's not the common word that I use, and there's an example for you, there's 17 ways to say popcorn in Spanish, depending on the region, like in Spain, in Peru, Colombia, Venezuela. Like, so this is an example of even in the same country, the region of the country can be a little bit different. So it's very important to have consistency, that the adults agree, they create a list. So there's a list of that. This is how we're going to be calling this. It's even common with Montessori material. Some of us call it a little bit different. So it's important to have that. And here is the last challenge. And this is a big one. So we want to achieve full bilingualism. So it's not just speaking and understanding, but also writing and reading. And this is a separate thing that comes up. First, our goal is to give the child a lot of spoken language, a lot of enrichment of vocabulary. We want to do that a lot, but at some point, we also want, like if the children stay in the program, in this bilingual program, an immersion program for a long time, the goal is for the children to be able to read and write in the second language. So let me give you a couple techniques to achieve that. The first thing is that we need to choose one language, ideally the native language, to do literacy. This is like, it's a process, it's a skill that the child will develop. And that process carries over to the other language. So I like to put that analogy when that glass is full. It doesn't matter what language you learn how to write and read. You already have the process of reading and writing. And then if you have the vocabulary, the spoken language, you can transfer the skill into the second language. This is very, very important, because I have seen many times that this gets mixed, where we're doing literacy process at the same time, and the child gets very confused. So this is something very, very important that we need to work. I worked as I was telling you, at a public school that we had dual language. And what happened in this program is that the children couldn't do literacy in their second language. They had to do it in their native language, but spoken language was all given in the second language. So this girl was very proficient in writing and reading. And I found her one day hiding behind a shelf. This was a girl that was reading and writing in English, and she was English native speaker, but could speak in Spanish. She was 2 years in the program, but she was very good at getting the languages. So I found her hiding on the shelf like that. And she had a Spanish book and she was reading like, mi casa se fue. But she was like doing something bad. Like she knew like we were not giving her literacy in the second language. And she was, because she really wanted to learn what the book was about. So this is, I want to give this example because that girl had mastered the skill. And because she already knew all the vocabulary, and Spanish and English, the sounds are very similar. Like the letters and sounds are very similar. She could do it. She just had to like, probably with some of the letters sounded a little bit odd, but she was doing that. She was reading in the second language. So that's an example of this situation, but we want to make sure that literacy, everything that is reading and writing is done in one language. Ideally, native language, we choose a language. And then once the process is strong, then we can start the process in the second language. Another technique, another thing that is very important is that we need to look at what is the second language that we're giving. So for example, Mandarin has a very different way of teaching it. Mandarin it's not phonetic, so they need to memorize characters. So it's a little bit different. It's not just the sandpaper letters. They need to do a lot of like memorization of characters through 3-part cards. So it's a different process. If we're doing like Spanish, English, Italian, those 3 languages, like we have Spanish and Italian, very phonetic. English is phonetic, but it has a lot of difficulties. So we need to know what language are we using and consider what are the challenges and what are the things that are common. And once we have that, design a program. One of the things that I always share, as you know, Maria Montessori describes in her books, and I love it, like this explosion for language, right? Where she saw this child writing mano, hand, and then it's like, they couldn't stop them, right? They got writing and writing and writing, and children were doing this. And I think that this is very particular to Italian or like languages that are very phonetic because it's very easy. And when we get to a language like English, we need to consider what are some of the differences with the language. So an example of when we do English is that we need to do those green sandpaper letters that you see there. I don't know if you're familiar with those ones, which are the phonograms, because there's other sounds in English that we need to learn. And we are conscious about all of these things. There's also phonograms and there's also puzzle words. So there are some words in English that there's no rule. They don't make sense, and we need just to memorize them. So these are the kind of things that we need to make sure we're integrating into our program that I was discussing. So we have a shelf with the things that are common for the languages and a shelf for the particular language. So if I'm doing Spanish and English, I want to have a small shelf where I have materials that are just particular to that language and make sure that I satisfy the need. If I'm doing literacy, if my goal is just to do spoken language, and that's fine. But if I'm going to do full bilingualism and I want the children to be writing and reading, we do that. In Spanish, we're going to have a couple different sandpaper letters, as you see in there. And we also have some difficulties that are different. In Mandarin, we also have, as you know, like this. Okay, so let's move into the third goal that we have for today. So we talked about how Montessori setting is ideal for speaking a second language, and we talked about some of the characteristics. We went through challenges and techniques, and I know we're going to be sharing this document where these techniques and challenges are going to be there. And now let's move into the last part, so we can finish and then move into having Q&A. So the third is the cycle for effective lesson language learning in Montessori. So there's 4 steps that I consider very important when you're designing your program. You want to think that you're going to integrate the second language in your Montessori classroom. And what are the things that you need to consider? First, you need to choose a second language program. You need to decide exactly what you're doing and have it very organized. So that's the first part of the cycle. As I was sharing with you, I'm sharing 3 of the options. They can apply it a little bit different. In my experience, as I shared before, dual language is a beautiful program. This is very common in Canada, where you have a lot of families that are like children that speak French, and then they also speak English, and then they have like, say, they speak in between themselves, they speak that. So that's that. If you have in your community a program like that, children that will come and will bring that, that's beautiful, because they have, as I mentioned before, the social component that motivates them to speak the language. So you want to analyze your options. You want to do some research, understanding how you're going to be doing that, and find what best meets the needs of your community, of your families, of the children that are attending your school. Any questions about this, or anything that you would like to learn more about these 3 types of second language learning? Okay, so I think we're good. That's great. Let me move now into the next step of the cycle. So the second one is develop resources and do a plan. So what we want to do is that we want to do a plan and based on a schedule. Like we want to have a schedule how our day is going to look like. A lot of the times as Montessorians, when we do lesson planning, we plan for individual presentations or lessons. So we say, like, oh, okay, so Phoebe and Dora and Pamela, I'm going to work with this, and I have very clear what individual lessons I'm going to be giving. And sometimes we don't plan for the routines. We skip that part that Maria Montessori calls it, like that stage where we have the collective stage, when the children are like knowing, like, what are we going to do for transitions? What are we going to do when the children come in? So when you're working in an environment that is bilingual, you need to make sure that you're planning for that, so adults know how they're going to be concentrating on offering these lessons. Because although we want to make it very natural, sometimes it is not that natural, because the child may be engaged in something in the other language, and you're like, oh, I need to present this to the child to keep advancing in the second language. So that's something that it requires that effort of double planning for both languages. And we also have to make sure that we have the materials needed. You need to inform the parents of what are the expectations of the program, what are the children going to be doing, like having an adaptation period where the children are going to come into the classroom. A lot of the parents also ask, should I be speaking? Should I be reading to the children in the second language? And sometimes they don't speak that language. And I'm like, no, probably don't worry. You keep reading to your children in your native language. Don't worry about that. So you want to give them resources. What are some of the things that you're going to be doing? Sometimes being a bilingual program, the parents get anxious because they're not going to see the child speaking in the language right away. It's similar to the development of the first language. The children are going to acquire a lot, and then it takes time for them to express. So that's something that you want to let the parents know, that it's a process, and it will take some time for the child to feel comfortable expressing in the second language. You want to have material for each one of the languages. You want to make sure that the guides, like if you're doing a language that you don't know how to give, like phonograms or like things that are particular to that language, you want to learn how to give those presentations. You want to have also a lot of books that are for that second language, and be having made very clear the names of the material. So that's part of like how you're going to be developing the resources. Now let's move into the third one. So give many presentations for spoken language. So I was sharing with you that we want to make sure that we do a lot of conversations, storytelling, real stories, singing a cappella, the clapping game. The clapping game is especially really good and effective when teaching a language that is phonetic, like Italian, Spanish, because you can divide very easily by syllables. So Mariana, and you're going to be doing that. So that's a way of doing the presentation. So that's something that you want to do. And consider having images. So you want to have so the child understands a lot of images for the activities. Okay. And now let's move into the fourth. Inspire the child to use the second language. Ways to inspire that. And I know I have some friends that have done it. I have done it in the past in my classrooms. Invite other people. It's not just the teacher that speaks that second language. It can be other professionals that can come and give like talk about culture, or they can do a presentation on different things that speak that foreign language, because they don't hear it outside of the classroom. So it's very important to invite people that can share that it is not just a language, but they can share activities. And that makes the child curious about that. We want to plan cultural activities. One day I did with my children a piñata. So we had like that activity, we were building a piñata and doing that. So that's something that we can do. Another aspect, cultural aspects are very important. So we want to have in our walls like little frames where we are showing some different art from different artists that represent the culture. We want to make sure that we also have our geography folders and show them, like make those connections with culture. So we went through this cycle. That's my recommendation to start your program, or if you already have a program, revise that process. That's something really important as you go. So let's do a quick review, and then I'm going to share with you what are going to be some of the resources that we are going to give you today, and then open the Q&A. So today we talked about the characteristics of the Montessori environment and how this is an ideal setting for teaching a second language, isolation of quality. We also talked about concrete materials, working one-on-one with children. Then we talked about some of the challenges and techniques, and the cycle. Okay, so just so you know, what are some of the resources that I'm going to be sharing? Judith, I think I'm going to be sharing them on the chat and probably send them to you if you want to share them after the training also. We can do that as well.
Yes, we can include them when we send out the recording. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Judith. So you're going to get 3 packages. The first one is going to be your webinar outline. So in there, you can have like things that I discussed, and the outline of this presentation is going to be there. So it's a PDF document, you open it and you have access to it. The second packet is going to include what we call the timelines. And I don't know if we have anyone in here that can read characters, Mandarin characters, but so that's what it's there on the screen. I'm going to be sharing with you the timelines for materials in English. And then we also have Spanish and Mandarin. So in here, what it says here, you have the ages of the children and then the groups of materials and materials. So you have a list. So here's if someone is doing Mandarin bilingual education, you have that resource, or if you're planning to do it in the future, Spanish or English, we're going to provide that. And then if you already have a program and you want some printables, this is, we call it our DIY printables. So we're going to give you 3-part cards in Spanish, in English, and in Mandarin. The 3 of them are different because as I was mentioning, we don't want to do the same topic on this at the same time. So I'm sharing different resources with 3-part cards. So that way you can print them and use them. And they also have instructions. Sometimes we have shared them with parents. As you know, last year that a lot of parents were at home doing, it has instructions on how to work with these 3-part cards. So thank you. We're going to open now for Q&A, and I really enjoy this time. So let me stop sharing. I don't know, Judith, is there something that you want to mention before we start the Q&A?
Yes, I want to thank you for your wealth of information and your vivacious approach to second language. It's really inspiring.
Thank you, Judith, for having us. Very happy to be working with you.
I think it's so, you've done such a comprehensive dive. It's a lot to take in. And so we are really fortunate to have the video, and which means that everyone present will have a chance to go back and review it and think about how these ideas can be implemented in their classroom.
Great, thanks. Oh, thank you very, very much, Naisari. Okay, are there any particular questions or anything that you would like to add into the conversation? We do have some time, right, Judith, to go on with the Q&A?
Usually we finish at this time, but
oh, okay.
there are questions. Of course, we stay open. So I think there's one question, if you actions at the same time as new vocabulary or phrases, does it matter if you do it before or after? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I don't think it matters if you do before or after. I preferably sometimes like to do the action after I say the word. But it's similar, remember when we're giving a presentation in practical life, that we do it in silence, so we want the child to absorb the movements. That's the same thing. Be conscious about it because it's not easy. But yes, when you do that, just isolate it. It's not particular after or before, but I think after works better. So thank you. I saw another question from Miranda. Will you please be so kind and share some book recommendations for children in English? Oh, I can do that. I can send that to Judith. I don't have my list here right now, but Judith, I will send you that. And because I know sometimes we struggle as Montessorians to find books that are not including fantasy. So we have a good selection. And there's some books that are very good that are level readers, but are good literature. So I can also send you that. Oh, by the way, I'm going to send it now because I know who is the publisher. So I can put it on the chat and I can look for it.
Could I just please make one observation?
Yeah.
I absolutely admire the thoroughness with which you have prepared your second language introduction and the scheme, but somehow I seem to have lost the child's spontaneous learning, the child's freedom of choice of what to engage with and how to engage with it. Your very precise timeline according to ages made me a little bit frightened because I think we could potentially lose the spirit of the Montessori principles, which is being guided by the children's inner need and their own interests.
Yeah, Barbara, I'm really happy that you brought that up. It's not the intention at all. I think a timeline helps us to see what is the recommended age, similar to our albums where we see like 3+, not meaning that it needs to happen there. I want to share, and I don't think I have the timeline, like want to show here something that I think it will be good to illustrate my point. The first thing, and we don't understand because it's Mandarin, but I can tell you, it says preliminary exercises. So preliminary exercises begin since the child is in the environment or spoken language, and they go all the way until the child leaves. And yes, we wanted this spontaneously, but still want to plan and think about it. I think that also when we are new to Montessori, sometimes we need a little bit of hint, like, in our albums, like, what is the age group? We observe the child. Of course, we don't want to follow like a milestone and say, this is when we are going to present, but it's an idea and gives us like a cue of like, between this age, this is where usually you're going to start introducing this material to the child. We never want to do that, Barbara, and I'm glad that you brought that up. Never say like, okay, yes, 4.5, introduce this to the child, but usually this is when we see it. And of course, you need to base your lesson planning on your observations. So that applies to first language and second language. When the child, you see readiness, interest, and you have observed that, you can start planning for that. But one of my goals is to like encourage guides to plan for things and with your observations and also with the knowledge on a specific age group. So yes, Barbara, not at all. We don't want to have it like that. I think timelines help us just visualize, mostly when we start our career in Montessori. I think that it helps us to get an idea of what are the options that we have between certain age groups. One more thing that I like to add is that a lot of the times guides with your 2.5-year-olds and 3-year-olds, we focus on like practical life and we don't think about spoken language. So part of what we really want to do with this time is like, this is a great opportunity to do many exercises in spoken language and then start this process and then define and observe the child, because there are children that are ready to be doing more of the materials that are like tactile sense and then moving to some paper letters according to the child. But taking this opportunity, not forgetting about that age group and the importance. So thank you, Barbara. That was a great point. I appreciate it.
Thank you for also sharing the idea that this is the second language you would actually potentially speak when presenting the practical life activities, because it gives you an opportunity to introduce the second language in the context of the activity. I very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and you know what, Barbara, the idea is introduce it as you will do it in the first language with no language, and then you can make sure that the child knows the names of the objects that you have. So that's how we will do it. But the initial presentation, the same as we do it in the first language, so that the child can absorb all our analysis of movement. Thank you, Barbara.
Well,
Go ahead, Judy.
I think we have managed to answer all the questions, and now we have a lot to take in and process. It's really been a wonderful presentation. Thank you for enriching us.